We often hear and read that people who cry are weak, are considered as weak. But we found that if people cry for valid reasons, we consider them as empathic, as warm, as reliable. These are the kind of people that we want to have as our friends. And at that moment, I started crying. It was completely unexpected to me, and I wondered, wow, what's happening to me? And then I concluded that, well, it seems as if my body is telling me that what's going on is something that I found very important, where I was not aware of it. It is very important as a kind of bonding mechanism. So to bond the baby with the mother, and suppose that the mother lost the baby, even in dense vegetation or in darkness, if the baby starts to cry, then it can be rapidly be reunited with the mother.
Hey everyone, just a quickie before we get into the conversation. The podcast is always going to be free, so I'm never going to ask you to pay for anything. But if you could do me the kindness of subscribing and maybe leaving a review, that would mean the absolute world to me. Thank you and enjoy the episode. Ad, tell me what's brought you to where you are today and the work that you do.
Yeah, well, I think there are three important events that made me start a career in the exploration of emotional tears and crying. It was in 1985 that I finished my PhD thesis, that was on stress, psychobiology of stress. And after that, I became involved in research on emotions and international study. And at that time, I was at a party, and one of the other guests, they approached me and they asked me, well, Art, you should know that I often read that crying is healthy and that it brings relief. What is the scientific status of that statement? And I said, I have no idea, but it's an interesting question. And I promised that I would try to look it up in the scientific literature. But I couldn't find any relevant studies. And it happened that I was relating it to a colleague, and we were overheard by some students who were looking for a research topic. And so they said, well, then we are the first one to do such a study. So that's one thing. Another thing was that I once was watching television, and there was a movie based on true facts. It was an American movie about a teenage girl who had cancer, and she was hospitalized, and the employer of her father didn't allow him to visit her. If he should do that and he was absent from work, then he should fire him. And that girl found that a bizarre situation. So she felt that something had to change and that measures should be taken to avoid such a thing. And so she contacted Make Me a Wish, and this organization allowed her to speak with Bill Clinton, who was president at that time. And there you see a scene in the movie where Clinton received that girl in his Oval Office, and he says something like, well, this is the famous Oval Office, and here I receive people from all over the world, very important people, very famous people. He said, but the most important person that I have that I receive here, that's you. And at that moment, I started crying. It was completely unexpected to me, and I wondered, wow, what's going on with me? What's happening to me? And well, then I sort of concluded that, well, it seems as if my body is telling me that what's going on is that's something that I found very important, where I was not aware of it. I felt as if my body placed a, a, a strong uh, marked,
Salience. Yeah.
marked that event as, hey, this is something that you find very
Mm.
important. That is something that I find fascinating. And well, a third thing that stimulated me to start research, that was there is a book written by Charles Darwin on the expression of emotions in man and animal. And his conclusion is that emotions and expressions of emotions are important for our welfare. But he also added that in his view, emotional tears do not serve any purpose. So for me as a researcher, that was a real challenge to try to prove that Darwin, at least in that respect, was wrong.
Mm. Yeah, it's interesting. So why did he come to that conclusion, do you think?
Yeah, well, I think at that time he was aware of the other function of tears that have nothing to do with emotions, but tears lubricate the eyeball, protect the eyeball, and so on. So the focus was more on the uh, well, more on the physical aspects, I think. Um, and well, of course, he was not aware of the kind of studies that we meanwhile did. What we
Mm.
do is we have pictures of crying individuals, and we can digitally remove the visible tears, so we have exactly the same pictures, and that is very helpful to study the meaning of pictures, and so.
It's an interesting example of how we look at the past through like our present day biases, because you look at someone like Darwin and you think, how could he not have thought that there was a purpose for it? Like that to me just seems wild.
Yeah.
Um, so what is there a what do you believe the evolutionary adaptive purpose of crying to be?
Yeah, well, our story, as we can kind of reconstruct it, is as follows. So, if we compare humans with other animals, we see that there are two differences. And then animals, we must limit that to mammals and certain bird species. You see that they mainly show this behavior as infants, not as adults, and for them it's just an acoustical or a vocal expression. It's not with tears. As, um, if you look at human infants, they are very similar to other mammals. They also start with just vocal crying or acoustical crying. It has been referred to, I think that's a wonderful way to explain the function of this acoustical crying. It's described as the vocal or the acoustical umbilical cord.
Mm.
And so that means that it's very important to to function as a kind of bonding mechanism. uh, so to bond the baby with the mother, and suppose that the mother lost the baby, even in dense vegetation or in darkness, if the baby starts to cry, vocally cry, then it can be rapidly be reunited with the mother. So that's a very important function of the vocal crying, and that makes sense for this extreme helplessness creatures that human infants are. Also, given that they have very limited motorical function and they cannot move themselves. However, as they grow older and they develop the motoric skills and they can move toward others, you can say, well, at that moment, vocal crying is less important, and at that moment, it's more interesting to dispose of a visual means to attract the attention of people of whom you expect and hope that they will provide support and protection and comfort if you need that. And that's also important for human children, because we are also unique in our very long, prolonged childhood. You see, most animals, they are born ready-made. That means that their brain has been already fully developed, so they are born perfectly equipped to fit a certain living environment, both with their behavior and their physical appearance. But we, as humans, we are born prematurely. Our brain keeps developing until the age of 20, 25. And, well, you can say the negative side of it is that we are then rather helpless and we need adults to protect us and to provide advice and support. But the other positive side is that we are very uh, um, uh, we can adapt to every situation and to every kind of natural environment. So that makes us very flexible because our brains are still developing. And so we think that that's the story of the evolution of crying. And what's also important is that so we feel that tears connect, and that they are helpful also to connect with others, and that collaboration is possible thanks to our crying and, more general, our emotional expression, which provides reliable information about who we are, what kind of people we are. And so if you learn from me what makes me sad, what makes me angry, what makes me fearful, then you have very important information about what kind of person I am. And then it's up to you to choose whether or not you want to connect with me or not. But it's rather reliable information.
Yeah, I was just, as you were speaking there, and I was thinking about interesting as maybe this is a man thing, but I thought about my father, and I thought, doesn't cry all the time, but maybe on occasion. And then you're like, oh yeah, they're quite memorable moments. And it's like, what's going on there? They're like these little moments in time where you bond that little bit more. And there's obviously something really beautiful going on there. And I think it's just such it's like a trust signal, isn't it?
Yeah, we have information that if we see someone cry for valid reasons, and then I think that we take ourselves as a standard. If I were he or she in the same situation, would I also cry? If the answer is yes, then we uh, we like the crying very much, and we find it important. We don't like callous people who do not show that reaction when we ourselves or we feel that that would be the standard to cry. You know, I was once called by a by a woman. She told me that she had not cried in 22 years when she had a stillbirth experience. And she said, is that a problem? I said, I don't know. I should ask you. And she said, well, for me, it's no problem unless there happens something sad in the family and everybody is crying and I don't cry. Then they consider me as a kind of ice cold, callous creature. And well, that I find a real problem. But apart from that, it's no problem for me, she said.
Yeah, I had a similar conversation the other week with, and we were talking about the effects of childhood trauma on blocking emotions, and the person I was interviewing was explaining how they found it difficult to experience joy or a lot of, you know, because the trauma response, the adaptive response from that experience was to just block things out.
Yeah.
And that's obviously similar to what this lady's gone through there.
Yeah.
But interesting, maybe our instinct is that, oh, that person's cold, that person's callous, but actually that person's been through a lot, and we should view it almost the opposite way.
Yeah.
So it feels somewhat contradicting there, doesn't it, with the way that we view others crying and that signal.
Yeah, you know what? We often, you often hear and read that people who cry are weak, are considered as weak. But we found that if people cry for valid reasons, we consider them as empathic, as warm, as reliable. These are the kind of people that we want to have as our friends, as our neighbors, as our colleagues, and we found them most fit for professions like teacher or nurse. And so, for us, we feel it's important that people cry when there is a good reason to do that.
Yeah, I'll tell you as well, my thought process for reaching out to you last week or this week, wasn't it? Watching TV. I don't know if there's a Netflix series called Last Kingdom. I don't know if you know it.
No.
Oh, it's very good. But it's all about like medieval England, and there's the Vikings and all this kind of thing. Anyways, it's not mega important. But there's a character in it, and she's dying, and I'm just like this blubbering, weeping mess. And then I catch myself, and I'm going, "What's this all about? Like, this makes no sense." So it's like, well, I'd love to talk to someone about this, find out exactly what's going on. And interestingly, prior to watching the TV, I'd had a bit of a stressful day. I wasn't in a great mood. I don't think I'd seen many other people. I've been working from home, whatever. I cry at these pixels on my wall. I feel better. I felt so much better. It was really strange. It doesn't always happen like that. Sometimes you're like, oh, that was a bit weird. Why was I crying at the screen? But I felt cleansed. It was really... And I was thinking, yeah, what is that physiological... What's going on with the neurochemicals and things there? Is there some sort of anti-pain signal, for want of a better term?
Yeah, we don't know too much about what's going on in our brains and so on when we cry. There's much speculation that substances like endorphins or opioids would be released, and that would make us feel better. But I'm not aware of any study who really has presented evidence. We ourselves did a study, um, in a kind of, I would say, an indirect study, because if such substances were released, that would also imply that it would have an impact on the pain perception of the crier. And so then you would find that after having cried, people would experience less pain. Uh, we have done such a study. We made people cry by exposing them to sad movies, and then after the film we exposed them to pain stimuli. But contrary to expectations, we didn't see any effect of crying on pain perception. If there was an effect, then it was even opposite, so that those who cried were more sensitive to pain rather than less, that the pain perception was increased,
That's
uh,
interesting.
lowered.
Yeah, that's so interesting.
Uh, but what we also did is, so we asked a sample of over 5,000 people in 37 countries about the most recent crying episode. And we asked them, among others, how did you feel after you cried? And then we found that exactly 50% of them indicated that they feel better after having cried, whereas 40% reported no difference in how they felt, and 10% felt that reported that they felt worse after their crying.
Do you know, was there a control for like whether it was crying watching TV or crying hugging a relative? Were you able to control for that?
Now, given this data, we became aware that the good question is not, does crying bring relief, but rather that the better question is, for whom and in which conditions does crying bring relief? And so we continued our research, and then we identified three important factors that determined whether or not someone feels better after a crying episode. And the first one was, it appears that individuals already must be in a good mental shape. In other words, people who are depressed or who suffer from a burnout, they tend to cry more often, but they never will experience any mood improvement. So those people who need it most, they do not benefit from their crying. A second factor was the specific uh, uh, situation, the occurrence that elicited crying. We made a global distinction between, on the one hand, uncontrollable situations, like the passing away of a significant other, versus, in principle, controllable situations like an argument or a conflict situation. And it appeared, to our surprise, that we mainly report mood benefits in the case of controllable situations, but far less in uncontrollable situations. And the third factor was, how do others, bystanders, react to your tears? If they react with understanding and the provision of support and comfort, yes, of course, then you feel better. But if they react with, if they ridicule you and they become angry and you feel embarrassed, then no there will be no benefits of crying. So you can really wonder whether the act of crying really is important.
Yeah, and that raises. It always seems to come back to like childhood trauma. These conversations, but it makes me think. Yeah, it may be that there is no straight up. Oh, this makes someone feel good. This makes someone not feel good. If someone's cried when they were an infant and they say stop crying, then what effects is that going to have on that person then
Uh,
later in life? And
uh,
yeah, it's something I hadn't considered before. Do you think what about an infant seeing an adult cry?
Especially if that adult is a parent, that is very difficult to bear for that child. We have some examples that are just anecdotal evidence. For example, uh, uh, children who are who suffer from cancer also, and they see their parents cry, then that has an enormous impact on them. And what you see is that these children also really do their utmost best not to cry themselves, because they fear that if they cry themselves, that also make their parents cry, and that's
Mm,
something that they want to avoid at all costs.
interesting. So, we hear these days. It's good to open up and for men to be vulnerable, uh, and fathers to show their emotions to the children, and obviously there's this balancing act here. Um, I never saw my dad cry when I was younger.
Yeah,
It's only when now we're older, and obviously society has moved on as well, I guess.
yeah,
But my mother, totally different. Of course, of course, I'm just a generalization, but I remember her crying a lot at films, at films a lot. Um, so yeah, and then it's like, well, how would I have thought about? Yeah, how would have I thought about my father if I'd have seen him crying a lot when I was younger?
yeah. It's difficult.
Mm,
Uh, yeah, I think that if it's a clear situation where a child, dependent on his age, of course, also understands from, well, that are the kind of situation that make people cry. So, in the case of the loss of a significant other or so, um, I think if you explain that to a child, that it would not be too much of a problem, and it's even good, I think, to be such an example to your child.
mm. Yeah, I was just reflecting on it then, and I think, yeah,
But but
perhaps.
but but maybe if there is tension in the relationship, and there is much crying, and the children do not understand exactly what's going on and why mama or daddy cry, then I think that might be a more complex situation.
Mm. What about tears of joy?
That's an interesting issue. There are two ways to explain tears of joy away. So, so there are people who say that they do not exist. Um, Let me give you some examples. Here in the Netherlands, we had quite a famous horsewoman, Ankie Vergunsven, who won a gold medal at the Olympic Games. And when she received the gold medal, she started crying. And so journalists asked her, so these are happy tears? And then she explained, no, I cry because my father passed away a few weeks before, and I cry because he's not able to attend this important meeting for me. I miss him at this moment. And another example, that was a soccer player here in the Netherlands. He, at a certain moment, he scored a goal, and then he started crying. Very unusual, actually. I've never seen that before. But there was also a story in this case. He was severely injured, and he had a very extreme and extremely difficult rehabilitation traject, and it was even the question whether he ever could have his comeback as a professional soccer player. But then he did have his comeback, and he scored that goal. And then, when he scored that goal, then you see his tears. So what at the first sight might be a very positive thing, then very often at the background there is something that's negative. That's one thing. There has been a psychiatrist who has analyzed a lot of at first sight positive situations, but at second sight it appeared that there were some things like this at the background. The other way to explain positive tears away is that you must understand that we do not cry because we are sad, but we cry because we feel helpless. And sadness is often associated with helplessness and powerlessness or frustration. But occasionally also other feelings can be accompanied by that kind of feelings. Especially women, they can experience powerless anger or a powerless fear in case of a rape situation. And so you must be aware that normal fear, which is associated with a fight or flight reaction, is not compatible with crying. But it but it is when there is a combination of the fear response and that feeling of powerlessness, then it's possible to cry. And the idea is that when you talk about powerlessness, that you can also, in more positive situation, feel that you are overwhelmed. You are overwhelmed by the beauty of music. You are overwhelmed by the beauty of nature, or the beauty of art, or even by the moral beauty of an act of another person who shows altruistic behavior or self-sacrifice or something like that. And then you feel kind of tiny and void, and so you do not know how to behave, and that's why you become tearful.
So it's fear plus powerlessness is kind of like
always a kind of powerlessness. And that's actually also a direct link with infants who are extremely helpless and who cry so much because they are helpless. It's uh, the crying is a sign from, I need something, but I'm helpless. You should help me. You should feed me. You should change my diaper. You should anyway, or just physical contact. That's what I need. Your bodily warmth.
Are we aware of any production of like pheromones or scent from crying?
There has been a recent study. First, there was a study in 2011 published in Science, where Israeli researchers claimed that female tears contained a substance which lowered sexual arousal in men. And
Wow. Wow.
that study
That's
made
interesting.
headlines all over the world. But it was, however, a very modest study, especially in terms of the number of participants, were just 26 or so. We tried to replicate that study in 3 times with over 250 participants, and we could not replicate that. So we were a bit reluctant to believe that. But these people from the same group, very recently, I think it's now about a year ago, again published a paper, and then they asserted that they found that female tears contained a substance which has an inhibiting effect on males' aggression. That to me makes much more sense. And I will be eager to also to try to replicate that, and but that's not so easy. But I will do that. But it's an interesting idea, I think. They gave also examples from the animal kingdom that there are some, I think it were mice or so, that they occasionally they wash their faces with tear fluid to protect them to the aggression of dominant peers.
Let's talk a little bit about your the studies that you do and have done. Because I thought about the one there that you tried to replicate the findings that the small sample size one in the other lab had done. What's the process there? Like, how do you? What was that one? The male arousal goes down when a woman's tears. How did you set that up?
That was the study was designed as follows. So we harvest fresh tears from women. So we made them sad, or they made themselves sad with movie or just memories of sad events also. And then in addition to the tears that we harvested, we also collected. We used samples of saline, and we trickled that over their face for a control situation as a kind of placebo condition. So the participants and the experimenters were not aware whether they used the saline or the tears. It was a double-blind study. And then the male subjects were exposed to pictures of women, and they had to rate to what extent they felt sexually aroused by the sight of these women. And so it appeared that those who were exposed to the saline, that they had higher scores in terms of sexual arousal than the group who made ratings when they were exposed to the tears.
And was the arousal, was that measured?
Those are self-reports, just
Self-report.
self-reports. So
It's not one of those measuring things.
No. Yeah, well, they did actually 3 studies. They also measured. That's important to mention, I think. They also measured testosterone levels in the blood, and that's interesting because they did that also in the new study, and there they again found that the testosterone levels went down. So that's something that they did replicate. But we limited ourselves to the self-reports.
Yeah, so it's probably it's perhaps it's that it's what is it? correlation isn't causation. Is that right? Something like that.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Okay. What about other studies that you've had really interesting findings from? What they look like?
Yeah, well, I think rather important study were those in where we used the pictures of crying people, and then we removed the tears digitally, so we have exactly the same pictures with and without visible tears. And then, well, there are meanwhile several studies who could replicate that finding, that with visible tears we consider the depicted person as warmer, and we felt more connected with that person. We are more willing to help that person. Yeah, we feel more empathy for that person. And we also did that even in a worldwide study in 44 countries with over 6,000 people. And in that study, we had not just the pictures, but we also had a brief explanation of why the depicted individual cried. So we had three reasons for their tears. One was a positive reason, so the depicted individual cries because his or her partner uh, uh, did a marriage proposal. And then a negative situation, so the depicted individual cry because his or her partner wanted to break up the relationship. And then the neutral situation, the depicted individual cries because, or we did not say cry, the depicted individual is cutting onions. and it appeared so that with visible tears, people were more willing to provide support for the depicted person, not just in the negative situation, but also in the positive situation, and even in the neutral situation. And so if they are aware from, okay, these tears are the result of cutting onions, even then we are more willing to provide support. And that's interesting because now, meanwhile, there have also been some studies in which they added tears to, for example, pictures of animals or pictures of robots. And then again, you see the real strong power of tears. Once people are exposed to a robot with tears, it makes the robot much more human. We like it more. And the same holds for animals. So tears have a very strong power.
What about any misconceptions around crying? That any myths?
Yeah. Well, actually, we already addressed a few. So first, the idea that most people associate crying with sadness. So that's not completely true. Then there is the misconception that crying is beneficial for. That's also not always true. Then there's the idea that people who cry are weak and that we have a negative. That's also not true. Uh, so that are some very important misconceptions. Uh, People are also, they don't know about where tears originate from and so on. Uh, you often hear the question, is the composition of happy tears different from the composition of sad tears? And, and people are not aware that these tears are freshly made, distilled from the blood in a very similar way as also occurs for saliva. So in many respects, the composition of saliva and tears is comparable. And so tears, or the lacrimal gland, it's not a sac or a bladder filled with tears. No, they are made freshly from the blood. And that means that if you are in a stressful situation and you're and the stress hormones in your blood are elevated, then it's likely that the stress hormones are also elevated in your saliva, but also most likely in your tears. It's as simple as that. And what you sometimes also read is that the idea that when people hear that there are all kinds of substances and stress hormones in your tears, that okay, they consider the lacrimal gland as a kind of kidney, that it cleans the blood, and that's the mechanism why people would feel better after having cried. But if that would be the case, then we also would feel better when we drool.
Mm. What do you think about? We talked earlier a little bit about evolution. Do you think if you could cast out like 500 to 1,000 years, what do you think is going to happen with the evolution of crying? Do you think we're going to cry more or less?
You mean in the future?
Mm.
How we develop?
Yeah. Do you think we're more likely to keep our crying, or do you think it would go the opposite way if you could?
No, I think that crying and more general the expression of emotions are very important. You know, as I already said, the expression of emotions is very important and rather reliable information about others, about who they are. And emotions are extremely helpful for us to navigate through the world, through our social environment. So emotions in general, they are important. They help us to avoid potentially dangerous situations. So fear helps us to avoid dangerous situations. Uh, Disgust, physical disgust, helps us to avoid potential situations where we might be exposed to microorganisms that makes us sick. But then we have feelings like guilt, shame, and so on. These are very important to repair broken connections with others if we make a faux pas. So if we say, okay, I feel guilty, what can I do to make to repair the situation? And also in the case of embarrassment, if you blushing helps other people to become more more prone to forgive you. And so it's extremely important. And these are all kind of uh, um, reactions, these emotions that are more or less automatically triggered. We don't need to think, is this a situation that I should feel shame, or is this a situation that I should feel guilt? It's nearly automatically we understand that. And well, I think that everybody knows for him or herself from, I shouldn't do that, because if I do that, then I will make him or her sad, or if I do that, I will feel guilt, So these emotions, they help us to navigate through to our lives, and they help us to maintain good connections with others, and they are important for our moral function. So yeah, I absolutely do not think that in the near future or in the far future we lost all our emotions, because that would really mean that we lost our humanity.
Mm. Yeah, I feel like that is probably more important than ever as we go into this bizarre world
Yeah,
filled
yeah,
with
yeah,
AI and trying to figure out what's real.
yeah.
Um, do you think tears developed before language?
Phew. Uh, yeah, I would think so.
Hard to
Uh,
prove, but yeah.
yeah, also given the fact that very helpless creatures like human infants use
Mm,
tears. It's also kind of, well, way to communicate, of course, uh, and it's a way of communication that we develop before we can use language skills.
yeah, I think that's why I was thinking about, if we went hundreds of thousands of years back, I'm thinking, well, if we didn't have language, maybe we cried more in the past because we didn't have as many, we didn't have language.
Yeah,
So that kind of got me on that train of thought with thinking, oh, I wonder if we actually cry less. I wonder if we'll, as we're able to communicate, as we're able to, oh no, Neuralink, connect with what what we're all thinking. Um, but yeah, it would be, I think it would be sad, no pun intended, it would be sad if it did go that way.
yeah, yeah, and it's so a basic need to give a signal that you are in need, and that you need help and support from others.
Mm.
It's extremely basic and important. So
Yeah, I was thinking a little bit about this controllable and uncontrollable tears that you
it is.
mentioned
Yeah,
before.
yeah.
So obviously uncontrollable is uncontrollable, that's pretty straightforward. When you say controllable though, do you think like the tears watching the television, is that controllable?
Yeah, well, in a sense, it's not controllable, because
Mm.
you cannot influence what you see.
I think sometimes
But,
though, I suppose maybe the difference is I know that I'm allowing myself to cry at the film. It kind of feels good. It's kind, I feel like maybe if I really wanted to, I could just turn it off. Whereas, if you had some tragic news or whatever, that's not the sort of thing that you can just turn off,
no, no.
is it? Um, and I was thinking about the difference, that helplessness, that cry for help, and the two different so the version of me sat crying watching television, maybe I feel good on occasion. I don't mind opening up. If I've cried alone because of something that's going on in my life, that feels very different.
Mm.
Certainly, if you're not with someone to be comforted.
Yeah, yeah. We analyze also the context in which people cry, and so uh, what we found was that we prefer to cry between, let's say, 7 and 10 p.m. when we are at home, and then either alone or in the company of our mother or our romantic partner. So especially people who we expect that they will provide us uh, with help and support or comfort. We don't like to cry in the presence of strangers.
Mm.
In that case, we love to hide. We prefer to hide our tears, or we withdraw to the bathroom or so, and in the work setting or so. And yeah, we also found that there exists a kind of delayed crying. Something happens in the work setting or at school, and then you suppress your tears, and then first when you are at home and discuss the situation with your partner, then the tears start flowing.
Mm. That's almost like a shorter horizon version of the Olympic athlete, because
Yeah.
it's kind of just like stretched out. Um,
What we did not yet discuss, but I don't know whether that's of interest of you, is the difference between men and women.
yes, that is on my list actually. Yeah, let's
Okay.
talk about the differences, what the sex differences when it comes to crying.
Yeah. Well, what most people think, that's true in this case. So adult women cry more often than adult men. But that difference is not there from the beginning. So if you look at infants, then there is no difference between the sexes. Or even it might be that boys cry a bit more often than girls. Um, but how can we explain this sex or gender differences? Uh, there are four important factors that play a role. Um, what is often overlooked is that there's a considerable difference in the amount of exposure or self-exposure to emotional situations between men and women. More precisely, in professional or career choice, there are many more women working in healthcare setting, which is especially a field where you came across emotional situations, but also in leisure time. I don't think that there are many men who say from, oh, tonight there's a tearjerker on television. I love to watch that. And so there's even um, some time ago there was a psychologist who introduced the concept fear of sadness. And it appeared that especially men suffered from that. And so they avoid situations that are associated with sadness. Uh, and so you can, if you compare what kind of movies men and women prefer to watch, what kind of books men and women prefer to read, maybe even the content of same-sex talk. And I think it might be more likely that women, when they discuss things, to address also emotional things, then that it's more likely that women do that than that men do that. And so that's one thing. A second thing is that hormones certainly play a role, and then especially that testosterone, so the male sex hormone, that has an inhibiting effect on the crying. And so I think there's more evidence, although no, not very strong, but it's even better evidence, anecdotal evidence, that than that there is a female um, hormone like estrogen that promotes crying. Um, what's further important of is social pressure, and maybe not necessarily from the parents, although that still may play a role, but especially also of peers. I think uh, an 11-year-old boy, he don't want to cry in the presence of a peer. He prefers to cry in the presence of his parents. more than in the presence of a peer.
Mm.
And what's also important to realize is that when you focus on the strong elicitors of tears, which are very important all over the lifespan, and then we're talking about separation, temporarily or well, yeah, separation, lasting separation, or loss situations, and such as homesickness and um, grief or a romantic breakup, and that are the strongest elicitors of tears, in addition to powerlessness and frustration. Then you see that the differences between men and women are not that big, but but you found differences as special, especially when you focus on more mundane and everyday situations like conflict situation, uh, a burglary, the crash, computer crash, a car that is broke, rebukement, that kind of things that I used to say from that are situations that more likely make men swear and women cry, and there you see the biggest difference in crying between the sexes.
Mm. Interesting what you're saying about the effect of testosterone, and I was trying to think, because I do quite a lot of like endurance events and things, and I was thinking about this emotional thing, and you think, well, there's absolutely no chance that you would cry on the start line. You know,
Huh.
maybe you've got adrenaline is high, and
Yeah,
but interesting. I wonder, like after you cross the finish line, or whatever, and that testosterone maybe takes a dive,
yeah,
and then that allows for that to come through.
yeah. Well, you also see it, especially with men who suffer from prostate cancer and who receive anti-hormones, and also simply when men grow older. So older
Mm.
men tend to cry more easily. That's nearly every old man will confirm that, and that probably also has to do with the fact that your testosterone levels go down.
Mm. I was just thinking about a friend of mine who's ridiculously fertile. He has many kids, but a couple of years ago, his partner got pregnant, and he was saying, yeah, he just kept on crying. And there's this whole thing where is it where once the woman gets pregnant, usually the man's testosterone drops
Yeah,
um, to
and
make him stick around. Yeah, so interesting. What do you think about have you looked at like different cultures or globally and how they view crying?
no, not necessarily. We did a large study in 37 countries, but most of these countries were Western countries. And we found some remarkable things that was contrary to expectations. We found that people tend to cry more often in cold countries than in warm countries, and we also found that the difference between men and women, that so the gender difference in crying was larger in more in countries where women's rights were more, I'd say that, were more accepted. So that was a bit
Sorry,
surprising.
could you say that again? Sorry, I didn't quite understand. So the countries, yeah, just I could totally miss that.
Uh, the countries where women's rights were more equal to men's
Oh,
rights.
rights, women's rights. Sorry, yeah.
Yeah, there we found the largest sex differences in crying. So that was a remarkable finding, I think.
Yeah, that is interesting. Huh. What about
And well, I know, but that are very well extreme cultures, extreme. Non-Western cultures,
mhm.
and there you have phenomena as crying as a greeting ritual.
Oh, really?
Uh, yeah, so instead of shaking hands or taking your head off, they start crying for a few moments. Uh, yeah, that's something that we can hardly imagine, I think.
Yeah.
and and like the Aztecs, they had weeping gods, and so crying was very important and strongly related to religion. And there are also several examples of tribes where, in times of adversity, but also when preparing for war, but in addition to when there was a famine or other disaster or so, people came together either to cry together, to sing together, or to pray together, all with the aim to promote social cohesiveness.
Mhm.
And I think that are all interesting anthropological phenomena, which often support the notion that tears are meant to connect.
Mm. Do you think I know we touched on, let's say, the Olympic medalist and almost like the relief that pent up over time, and that's why they're crying, the tears of joy. We touched a little bit on music, but is there anything different there with music? It seems like it's almost unlocking us somehow, unblocking emotions, and things flood out. And people say, "Oh, it's just the music is so beautiful." But I guess what we're saying is it's maybe not the music that's beautiful. It's this tension between something that's happened in the past and then it's opening you up.
Yeah, yeah, that's certainly the case. We did a study on crying in response to music, and we had nearly, I think, nearly 3,000 participants in that study, and we asked them which song made you cry most recently, and we received 1,200 song titles. So it was there, nearly every song can bring someone to tears because there is a very unique and individual memory or a kind of occurrence that is associated with that song. That there were only uh, two songs who a little bit scored higher, but that was then they were mentioned 7 times, for example, or
Mm.
5 times. And interestingly enough, both songs had to do with the connection with the parents. One
Mm.
was a song Papa, which is about the relationship with the father, and the other was about the relationship with the mother,
Mm.
interestingly enough. But apart from that, all kinds of songs have the power to make people tearful. And that also to some extent is the case with movies. When we started this research, we were looking for movies. We had the idea, well, we hope to find a movie which in nearly everybody makes cry. And then, well, there were rather many journalists who wrote about our work, and so then I shared with them that we were looking for good movies. So we often received all kinds of emails from, oh, you should take that movie. And then we watched that movie. Is this a movie that makes someone cry? Absolutely can't understand. So it's really very personal. And also a nice anecdote in that respect is the following, that we used a movie. It was a very emotional movie with a lot of aggression. It was about a Maori, a New Zealand Maori family, in which the man was unemployed, and he just did some partying with his friends, and he mistreated his wife. And then there was a party at his own house, and then one of his friends raped his daughter, and that daughter committed suicide. So it was a heavy movie. And we used that with students, and 66 of 100 students reportedly cried at least once during that film. And then we asked, well, maybe it's interesting to collect tears, and then if we focus on very sensitive women, maybe we can have a score of not 66%, but maybe of 80%. And so we invited very sensitive women, and we asked them to complete questionnaires to check whether, and indeed, we had 30 very
self-identified sensitive women. Is that correct?
Yeah. And so we invited them in the lab, and we exposed them to that movie. And afterwards, it appeared that just 2 of them had cried. That was unexpected, and absolutely not something that we had anticipated. But it turned out that this woman explained, I didn't watch that movie. I sat there with my eyes closed. This film was far too aggressive. If you want to make me cry, you should expose me to a movie about sad children or sick children or sick dogs and so on, but not with aggression and physical abuse and that kind of things. And so but that's a nice illustration, of course, also how people protect themselves. And the difference between men and women also have that it can be too harsh. The content can be too extreme, and that then people shut themselves for that kind of movies and emotional content.
Yeah, no, that makes so much sense. Yeah, this is too much. I'm going to avoid it altogether.
Yeah.
What is it? Does it use a lot of calories producing tears? What's the energy cost?
So I had no idea.
Yeah, I was just thinking, not as a weight loss. I'm not touting it as a weight loss fad, but I think I was thinking usually, if you do cry, you don't usually cry straight afterwards. Feels like it takes quite a lot of energy because afterwards you have this kind of like lull, and then to imagine crying again it's almost like after you sneeze a few times, it's kind of impossible to imagine But I was just thinking, like, is it? Yeah, does it expend a lot of energy to actually to do this? And it'd be interesting to know if that was the case.
Yeah, I'm afraid I can't answer that question.
It's good. I've been thorough in my questions. If you can't answer one, what keeps you motivated to be doing the studies, these studies that you're doing in this particular field?
Yeah, well, it's a topic that can be studied from very different perspectives. You can study it from the social psychological perspective, you can study it from the clinical psychological perspective, from the developmental psychological perspective. So, how does crying develop when we grow older? And that's also an interesting thing, uh, because you see that to some extent uh, it's clear that changes in the antecedents. So what makes us cry? That is dependent on reflects our socio-emotional development. So what you see, for example, is when we grow older, we not only cry because of the suffering and sadness of ourselves, but also the suffering and sadness and misery of others. So that means that we develop our empathic skills when we grow older. And so that's reflected in the reason why we cry. We can even, yeah, we discussed that already with cry in response to movies, because we can identify with the main character in the movie, even if that's a cartoon figure. Is it Bambi or in the Lion King? So that's an interesting development. And what you also see is that the seemingly positive tears, so crying when we witness self-sacrifice or altruistic behaviors, of even crying in response to music, that's also not often seen in children, but that also is something that uh, becomes more frequent when we grow older. Whereas, in contrast, crying in reaction to physical pain, that's extremely important for infants and children, but for adults and for the elderly, well, sometimes you see it, but it's very unusual. It's not very common. And so that you can see that actually tell me what makes you cry, and I can tell you who you are and where in your development you are. And it's interesting. I was once approached by forensic psychologists affiliated with a high security prison in the UK, and they wondered about the development of an objective test um, to measure whether their therapy, which was intended to elevate empathy in psychopaths, whether they could objectively measure that by, for example, uh, having a kind of a set of movies that makes us become tearful, and that we can objectively measure whether that same set of movies make these persons also tearful after having undergone that therapy. That's an interesting idea, I think. So then there's a close connection even um, to crying and moral functioning, nearly. Uh,
Mm,
so um, so then you can see, from on the one hand you have not just the physical disgust, but the moral disgust that is elicited by behavior of others that makes us feel disgust. So if people torture others or misuse others, and on the other hand, the other opposite is that we can be being moved by positive acts, by altruistic acts, by self-sacrifice. So that's something that I find very interesting, and I wonder whether that's really a very basic version of our moral functioning.
Mm. What happened with the prisoners? Did that develop into anything more?
Yeah, well, the problem is that it's rather difficult to objectively measure when someone starts crying.
Mm.
That was several years ago. We did some work, but we were not too enthusiastic about that. Whether we could identify objectively the start of the flow of tears. We have tried to do that with infrared cameras, which made it able to detect temperature differences, but that was also not very successful. But now, with this very rapid developments in artificial intelligence, that might offer new perspectives on that.
Yeah.
I happen to have spoke very recently, last week, with a director of a firm who develops all kind of uh, also computer programs for face readers, so that they can read
Mm.
your face, all kind of emotional expressions. But surprisingly, he was very proud that they could read and detect all kind of emotional expression. But I said, why? But you cannot read whether someone is crying. And then he realized, no, that's true. You're right. Maybe that would be a nice extension. So he is now
Mm.
really thinking about extending his program with that feature.
It's an interesting idea that, yeah, for those who struggle to feel emotion because whether they're a psychopath or whether they've got blocked trauma or whatever, that a KPI, a key performance indicator, could be the amount of tears that they could actually produce, as like, okay, they're starting to open up a little bit more. I wonder, you have all these fitness trackers, don't you? And HRV and resting heart rate. Maybe the smart glasses that they're doing now, maybe they could measure the tears.
Yeah.
And you could get some stats on how many tears that you did the last month. Or your your tears have increased since the last 30 days.
Yeah, theoretically, it might be possible.
Yeah,
uh,
yeah, yeah. Very interesting. What about where do you think the future of your research will look like? Have you got anything in the pipeline coming up at the moment?
yeah, what we're currently doing is we're trying to replicate and extend that study with the content of tears with pheromones, so
Hmm.
and because what I think might be interesting also is if that really is the case, I think it would be extremely important as a means to lower the abuse of children who cry. And so crying children, or especially crying infants, are at increased risk of physical abuse, because it's very annoying. So, but that means if their tears also would contain such a substance, that that would be interesting if we could find evidence for that. Um, what I also am interested in is what's going on in the brain. There's so many possibilities now to study what's going on in the brain when being exposed to all kinds of situations. And well, what they did is they studied what happened in the brain when people are exposed to crying. But what we do not know is what is happening in the brain at the moment that someone starts crying himself or herself. And that's surprising, because there has been studies in which they exposed people to sad content. And so these researchers told me, yes, some of the volunteers cried and others did not, but they didn't compare the findings of criers and non-criers, unfortunately.
What have you learnt about yourself through studying this this particular field?
Yeah, what did I learn myself? Um, well, first that that I'm rather normal. That with my increasing age, it becomes more easily to cry. that's that's one thing, that's sure. And another thing is that, yeah, what I already told you about, that movie that made me cry with a child with cancer. So that well, we appear to have some knowledge in our body that we are not aware of, and that these tears can put exclamation marks in certain situations. That's also something that keeps me thinking about. That's also might be an important effect of crying on the crier, him or herself.
Yeah, it's like an indicator. If something in particular moves you, what is it
Yeah,
about
yeah,
that
yeah,
thing
yeah,
that
yeah,
you can learn about yourself?
yeah.
When was the last time you cried?
Ooh, that's not so long ago. I don't know whether you also heard about, but here in The Hague, there was an explosion, and that has been probably caused by criminals
Wow.
who wanted to blow up a certain shop, a bride shop. But it appeared that I think there were 8 or 9 houses and apartments were completely destroyed, where 6 people were killed. It's
Wow.
really absurd.
Yeah.
And yeah, when I was watching and heard about that, that made me shed some tears. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really sad. No, I hadn't heard about that. I actually don't consume a lot of news, but yeah, no, that's awful. But it's much more serious than the last time I cried, which was to a film. So, before I finish up, what I like to do is I've got a bit of a tradition that I've started, whereby the guest tells me what question that they need to ask themselves at the beginning of each day. What is it that you need to hear? It's like a reflection before you go into your day. And you've got 2 options. You can do one for you and one for the audience, or you can just do one for both if it's something.
Oh, Well, I'm retired, and I think it's important for people who are retired that they spend their days in a meaningful way, and that they are involved in volunteer projects, or that they um, well help others, uh, at least that they have social contacts, and that they still challenge themselves also intellectually. And so I think that that's important to start the day with. I know some people who are retired and they just do nothing,
Mm.
and I really think that that's a serious problem, especially when we see that the demographic development show that within the next few decades there will an enormous amount of people who are retired, and it's extremely important that we can teach them how to spend their days in a meaningful way.
Mm.
That's something
What
that I'm
what
really
would that look
concerned about.
like as a question to ask yourself? How would that formulate?
So yeah, well then, what can I do today to make it a meaningful day?
Mm. Yeah, I think
What?
that's good for anyone, regardless of whether you're retired as well.
Yeah.
Um, where should this has been fantastic. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time and to tell me all about your fascinating work on this. So thank you. Um, where should I direct people if they want to learn more about your stuff? Do you have social media, anything like that?
No, I'm not very good in social media. I even have no smartphone.
I love it.
So yeah, I have a website, and but I don't know how often it is actually how often it's visited. I should
You need
ask
to
them.
install Google Analytics.
Yeah. So, but yeah, I only know that the media interest is enormous.
Mm,
It's really bizarre how
mm.
often I'm approached for podcasts, for interviews from. Well, maybe you also saw it that I had 4 weeks ago a big article in New York Times.
I didn't see that. No,
Ah,
no.
okay. And yeah, so now I'm talking with you. I already had a podcast in Dutch.
Mm,
Was Tuesday. I had an interview with a French science, popular science magazine.
mm,
I had a connection with um, and a radio station in LA for an interview. I was approached by the German television for advice on a on a program in which
wow.
they devoted some time to tears, and yeah, it's quite busy. So
So is that quite a recent phenomena as well?
well, it comes in waves,
Yeah.
and then yeah, for example, after such an article in the New York Times, then you have some spin-off, a direct spin-off,
Mm.
and so
I'll find that article. I'll link it in the show notes as well.
and I'm now working on a English popular book on tears. That's how I want to conclude my career.
Awesome. That'll be keeping you busy.
Yeah.
Well, we shall definitely look out for that. And thank you again. Is there anything before we wrap up? Anything we didn't cover that you want to put out there?
Well, no, I think that we addressed all important things.
Yeah. Hard to distill decades of research into 90 minutes, but I think we covered a lot. Ad, thank you so much for this, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of morning.
Yeah. Thank you for the interest in my work, and I hope that I met your expectations and that you see possibilities to make something nice of it.
Yeah, no, it's been awesome. Thank you so much. Hey guys, it's me. Thank you so much for watching that episode, and congratulations for making it all the way to the end. I really appreciate it. A few things before you get going. If you haven't already, please do subscribe. And if you enjoyed this episode, the kindest thing you can do for me is to share it with a friend or family member. Don't forget to check out the show notes for links to both my guests and myself. And if you made it this far, why don't you drop me a DM?